Hello, welcome to Heart-Centered Conversations with me, Jane McDowell, the podcast where I delve into people's bookshelves and ask them about the books that have inspired them, shifted their perceptions, and led them to do great things in their life and the world. And today I am super chuffed to be speaking to my great friend, Lesley Waldron. Lesley, introduce yourself to everyone.
Hello, Jane. Thank you so much for having me here. But this was a really hard ask actually, because I've got a bookshelves full of books that I found
Yeah.
really inspiring. So I will try to stick to just one. So I'm an integrative women's health coach. I work with exhausted midlife women who are struggling through peri to postmenopause transition with feeling wildly well again, finding their zest for life and their enthusiasm and purpose sometimes too.
Yeah,
Um,
and jolly good you are at it as well, because I've
Thank
had
you,
the privilege
darling.
of working with you,
Mm.
Lesley, and yeah, helping out on some of your beautiful retreats that you've
Yeah.
done. So, yes, anyone looking for help in that area, Lesley is the person to go to.
Thank you,
So,
darling.
Lesley, what book have you brought to the table today?
So I've brought Brene Brown's Rising Strong, which I love her books. And really, it was her two TED Talks that I found particularly transformative way back when. But I thought Rising Strong was a particularly good example. And actually, after you've asked me this question, and there were three books that sprang to mind immediately, and delving into this again has made me realize that it's really helpful for where I am in life right now, as
Oh,
well as
wow.
how helpful it was way back in sort of 10, 13 years ago.
Yeah, isn't it great how we
Hmm.
can visit a text, get something from it, and then revisit it and get a whole new
Hmm.
thing and what's the word I'm looking for? Learnings from it. Is that what I said
Yeah,
already?
yeah.
Learning? Who knows? Anyway, it'll all come out in the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read she's written several books since, and I've always read them and enjoyed them. But it was interesting how I came back to this one, and it may well be because of the particular life phase that I'm in again now.
Hmm.
So, but one of the things that I found really interesting about her work is the way in which she uses story and to both illustrate the examples of kind of the theories and ideas that she's presenting in her books, but also because story is how she does her research too, that she's a qualitative researcher. So she does lots of interviews and hundreds, thousands of interviews and finds common threads and themes in those.
Yeah.
We are all, as human beings, we are all kind of the sum of our stories. And then we're also often impacted by other people's stories. And when we give ourselves the time and space to understand those stories, we connect so much better and we can also find those solutions. So it draws me in both in terms of this being about a book about getting back up again
Yeah.
through from difficult situations, but also just because story is such an important part of our human experience, our experience as women, particularly. And it's also a big part of how I work with my clients as well, understanding their story, what's brought them now to
Yeah.
where they're now, as well as understanding the stories that they're telling themselves that sometimes are holding themselves back because
Yeah.
I
I was just going to ask you about that. When you talk about stories, are you
know.
referring to a kind of history, what's happened
Yeah.
to it, or and I think you just answered the question. Is it more about the stories that we tell ourselves that, as you say, can hold us back and
Definitely.
basically the stories that we've got going on in our head aren't always true, and
Mm.
yet we believe them, which holds us back. On a really simple level.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I always said that an example that I often use with some clients, depending on the situation, is how I got to this point where I'd feel really resentful at the weekends or during the week. I'd build up this resentment all week particularly when my kids were really young and I was working, but running a business and feeling resentful towards both my husband and my children because it felt like I was doing everything.
Yeah.
so this resentment would sometimes build up to the weekend, and then I would just sometimes well, not really massively explosive, but I would be just a bit grumpy and a bit kind of unable to enjoy the weekend. And actually there's a story that's in this book about stealth expectations, and about how we can, it was because I'd never really asked for anyone to help and made it clear. And actually once I realized that that's what was happening, that the resentment that I was building up was so unhelpful, but that was really unhelpful and wasn't actually helping me move forwards. I actually was like, okay, well, I need to rewrite the story.
Yeah.
And I got this thing where I had a whiteboard up on the board, and all of the daily jobs, all of the little things that needed to be done every day were on the whiteboard. And then you put a box next to it and you tick it and put your initial if you did the thing.
Yeah.
And then if I did the thing, you get a point. And then I had this thing where if I am 10 points ahead by Saturday, because I'm the one that's hung out the laundry, put the laundry away, emptied the dishwasher, done the cooking, done the, all of those things every day. If I'm more than 10 points ahead, I do nothing all weekend. You've got to do all of it. And it just made it really clear. Like for the first couple of weeks, everyone's like, wow, Mum's got like 40 points and I've got 2. It's like, well, and it just made
democracy in action.
It just made it really, but it just made it clear. So rather than having a story about me doing everything and I've got to do everything and I've got to please everybody, which is the story that I'm still running and still working on, but it just made it a little bit clearer. And then the resentment goes, because rather than trying to expect my husband and my children and my mother-in-law, who's around sometimes, to read my mind, it was just what I wanted and needed. And it's an ongoing thing, but it was very helpful.
Yeah, also, I'm just picking up on that. I think sometimes we tell ourselves stories, as I said, that are completely untrue. And sometimes that I'm pretty sure that they are governed by our hormones or our stress levels. Because I distinctly remember going through a really stressful time when I had a corporate role in London, and walking along the street feeling really grumpy and thinking, God, my husband doesn't do anything and I do everything, blah, 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 blah. And then there was another little voice in my head saying, whoa, hang on a minute, this is not true. And then I was having this battle in my mind because, to be fair to my husband, he does a lot around the house. And so I think it might have been the time when he'd been made redundant and he was, kind of working as an artist from home. And I just felt I was going out every day to this job that I really like. And so the resentment bubbled up and these stories bubbled up that weren't true. So, So
and because it's like our brain is always trying to find a way to rationalize things.
Yeah.
So the tricky life situation that I'm living through right now is that my mother has Alzheimer's and I am caring for and supporting her. And it has all kinds of different things to deal with and all kinds of things that brought up. But it's so interesting how her brain is very much in denial that she has this disease, or that she has the disease but it's not affecting her.
Yeah.
And how she creates stories to explain certain things that are going on or going wrong, like the reason why she can't find something, the reason why she took the wrong medication, she took too much medication, like there was. And I think that our brains kind of do that a lot to try and help us stay safe, stay sane, feel like we're fitting in. And so, and like you say, sometimes we're just making them up. And so if we know that there is a story there for us to uncover, that it can be really useful for our well-being, mental and physical, sometimes, to uncover it. Often I ran a workshop yesterday for some teachers in a go along to a teachers staff meeting in a particular school a couple of times a year to talk about well-being. And I get them to fill in a questionnaire beforehand, and they're very busy, they're very stressed, a lot of them have kids as well, life is really, really busy. And so the story they're all telling themselves is, I haven't actually got time to look after my well-being.
Yeah. It's a
Because it
common
doesn't,
story, isn't it?
it's a really common story. It happens a lot with a lot of my clients. I haven't got time, or no one will let me. Um, and actually, the process that I took them through there was to explore those stories briefly, because I didn't have very long with them, but also then to say, well, where is the gap? So to find the gap, to find micro actions. And if you haven't got any time, have you really not got any time, or is it you haven't got a long period of time? If you had 5 minutes, what could you do? And I got them to brainstorm a series of micro actions in the key part of their life. And then the idea is you take that tiny action consistently, and then even though you haven't got any spare time, you can find 5 minutes to do one thing for yourself.
It's that 1%, isn't it?
Yeah,
That leads us to,
yeah,
there's a great
yeah.
book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olsen that's all about
Oh yeah, I've
well.
come across that. There's two books on kind of on behavior change that I really like, the Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits, I think they're called. They're both about habits, and about that, how that making that really, really tiny action can, and making it as easy, as simple as possible, can
Yeah,
make it something that sticks. So, and that it kind of creates a bit of a domino effect. So I was talking
absolutely.
yesterday about how having an extra glass of water gives you a bit more energy through the morning. So actually you're not reaching for caffeine and a chocolate biscuit to go with it. If you're better hydrated, sometimes you sleep better at night, so then you wake up in the morning, you're more energized anyway. So like those tiny things can make a big difference. And I think so, but what I like about this is that sometimes it's very, even those tiny things can feel really hard because of the strength of that story that's running in our head. And sometimes they're stories that are coming all the way from our childhood.
Yeah,
Certainly in both in terms of my own becoming a mother, and then running my own business, and then also now caring for my mother, noticed and explored lots of stories that feel like they are really old. So like from my childhood or from generations before me, almost, around
yeah,
the role of the woman in a household, and around kind of around caring, and around guilt as well for doing
yeah.
anything that you feel that you're doing for yourself. And I can't remember if it's in this book or another one where Brene Brown talks about guilt versus resentment, and how actually resentment is much more kind of insidious
Yeah.
and difficult emotion to deal with. Guilt is sometimes because you've actually done something for yourself, and as long as you name it, it can be really much easier to deal with.
So when you first read Rise by Brene
Mm.
Brown, what did
Mm.
it bring to your life and your business? Were you running your business at that point, or were you
Uh,
still
Let me have
sort
a
of
look. I
side
think
role?
I was in the early stages. Yeah, so 2015. Yeah, so I would have been in the early stages of running my business. And what I was finding difficult was this transition. I'd worked at a fairly senior level, both in universities and then in a non-departmental government body. And so like in kind of not quite the civil service, and quite academic type. Not, I wasn't an academic, but like within academic environments
Yeah,
quite a lot. And so then moving into running a fitness business and becoming a personal trainer, I had loads of stories about what that meant, whether I was letting myself down, whether my education and experience were going to waste.
wow,
And then also then about, kind of that balance between focusing on the business and focusing on the family, because you're working for yourself. And it was really helpful then, because it made me notice those stories about made me notice the stories that I was telling myself about that transition from being employed to being self-employed, from an academic type role, or like a white collar type role, to something that wasn't really, where would you put yourself as a personal trainer? Because personal trainers come from all kinds of backgrounds, which is what's
yeah,
wonderful about them. So that's where I started. And the other thing is that I'd had like a year and a half where my son hadn't slept, and I had really struggled at work.
yeah. I
And
can imagine.
yeah, it was so stressful. And I basically felt like I had an impossible job. Like the role that I'd been given when I came back from maternity leave was about a particular aspect of the role of my organization that was about getting agreement between a number of different parts, so government and then all of the different sectors that were involved, who fundamentally disagreed with each other about many things, and trying to get them to agree on something. So it was an impossible job.
Yeah,
And I
herding
had a
cats by
boss,
the sounds of it.
and I wasn't sleeping, and it was an impossible job. And then I had a boss who just started to not show up to our one-to-one meetings. So she just kind of kept cancelling them. And I was like, couldn't work out if it was because I wasn't doing a very good job, or because it was that she was so busy, or that she found me annoying. I don't know.
Yeah, there's always those stories. My boss
And
hates
so,
me.
yeah. And so then everybody hates me.
Yeah.
And so then I'd really enjoyed working for that organization previously, but it started to really undermine how I felt about myself in that environment. So I started to feel like a bit of a failure. And then it brings up all kinds of other stories. And so reading this made me go, okay, I was down there in that messy middle, and it was okay to struggle. Like it's sometimes we are, and sometimes in that struggle we learn new things about ourselves. And so
Absolutely.
when I left, I think I might have even have read it. I think I probably did read it, and I had this month off kind of with stress. And while I was trying to work out what I do, what I don't do next, I'd come across her 2 TED Talks and bought the book. And I just think it just made me go, do you know what? There is so much more. I'm getting stuck in a story. I'm getting stuck in, this is what I feel like I should do. This, and I've never, I've had a very varied career, which is wonderful. But every time I felt stuck, I have stepped sideways to work out what to do next.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think
and
it's a great point as well that, whenever we're building a business, we always go through some tough times. It doesn't
yeah,
matter who you are or whereabouts you are on your business journey. There'll always be bumps in the road. And I find it's really comforting in a way to recognize that every time you have a bit of a breakdown, it's always followed by a breakthrough.
yeah.
So keep going because things will change.
And that's definitely what comes through from all of her work, is that actually having struggle is part of us learning about ourselves. And that, but when we're in the middle, when she talks about, there's a quote about being face down in the arena. I can't quite remember. I think I put a note in there somewhere, but I can't remember where it is. See if I can find it. No. About being face down in the arena. So you're like, and you're covered in dust, and you're trying to work out if you can get back up and fight. And that actually sometimes we have to get to that point. If you always win, you don't learn.
Yeah.
And that actually then you're when you're face down in the arena, you can look around and look at all of the other people who are struggling as well. And you realize that you're not on your own either.
Yeah.
And I think from this work and all this book, and then all of the reading that I've done since then, has really helped me not to get stuck in my stories, not to get my stories, supported me in supporting my clients. And then when I have had struggles in the past, I'm very solution focused anyway, but it's helped me to understand that it's not just about going and getting a sticking plaster solution, but understanding what's going on underneath, whether it's the stories I'm telling myself, whether it's about something that's going on with my health, whether it's about, managing, maintaining better stress levels, or whether I need to do, whether it's about my nutrition, to explore the stories that are holding me back and find a way through.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So it sounds like a really inspiring book, and now you come back to it.
Yeah.
So is it
So coming back to
how has your perception of it shifted since you first read it? Because
since I
obviously
first
you're
read
now in
it.
a different place in your life, and you said, your mum is, got out
Yeah. So I
caring for
think
her.
it's reminded me that I'm never done. And I knew that, but that I think that actually it's that actually the falling down, like I have had some moments in the last couple of years where I've really struggled with this, because Alzheimer's and dementia, I mean, like there are so many people struggling with it now, and it is Rising, I think it's now the biggest killer, like ahead of heart disease.
Oh,
And it's also kind of, they call it the long goodbye, because you lose a person quite, you chip away at that person, that individual. And so there's like this mixture of grief and resentment because I, like, my siblings live overseas, and I couldn't work out how else to support her apart from her moving closer to me.
yeah.
But then also what the disease does to a certain extent is it amplifies some of mum's stories, some of the stories she's always told herself about not being good enough, about not being loved, about yeah, things like that, quite negative stories that are then I'm like, and then it's like, well, actually, I'm at, the first few times I hear them, I can try and help her to see how much she is loved, and like, look at all the evidence in your life. But then we go round and round and round again. So I was like, this is an excellent lesson for doing therapy and working out my own stories now. But it's made me see that I keep falling down and I keep feeling like I'm failing, and I'm not. I'm learning, and I can't do it perfectly because there is no perfect here. And I also cannot sacrifice myself on the altar of looking after my mother. Just, I had a wonderful childhood. I'm really privileged in that way. I always knew how much I was loved. But if I sacrifice everything for my mother in this phase of life, then what happens to my children and my attention for them? And then a business that I absolutely love and I have worked for 9 years to grow and build, I can't sacrifice that either. So when I'm down there in the dust and the mud, wondering what I can do, coming back to this has reminded me that I'm not failing by being down there, but then it is an opportunity to look around and say, what can I do differently? What stories do I need to explore here? What expectations am I not actually articulating?
Yeah.
As well.
Well, Lesley, that's such a poignant story, and I'm sending all my love to you and your mum because it's such a difficult time. And thanks so much for sharing that, because
Well,
I think a
I'm
lot of
really
other people
keen.
will appreciate you
Yeah,
sharing that too.
I'm really keen to keep talking about it because I am not the only one. I think I've got 4 or 5 friends who are in a similar position to me, just through conversations that I've had recently, and it will just keep happening. So the more that I can talk about both how difficult it is and the opportunities in it, the better. So
Yeah.
mm.
Oh, well, Lesley, thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
sounds like Rise by Brene Brown has really,
Rising,
really helped.
rising strong. Yeah,
Yeah, Rising Strong, sorry. Yeah, and great that it's also had that knock-on effect of helping your clients as well.
absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for sharing,
Thank you
and
for having me.
love to welcome you back to talk about another book. I know that, in our
Oh
friendship,
my
we've
goodness.
talked about so many books on our walks and things
Yeah.
like that. So
One book which is wonderful about stories is something called Gift from the Sea. It's a really old book. It's not a self-help book,
yeah,
really, written by Morrow Lindbergh. And I think it's something that all women in midlife should read. Anyway,
fabulous. I will put the details of that into the
tell them that.
description of this episode. And on that note, I wish everyone goodbye and thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.
Bye.